All right, we have finally arrived at 10:45. Yay! All right, everyone. Well, welcome to Drupal and Drupal Corn. My name is Drew Gordon, and obviously this is the Welcome to Drupal session. Before we get started, I'm curious, how many of you are web people who are like responsible for a Drupal site in some form or other? All right. And how many of you are like web designers, developers? All right. How many folks do more content kinds of things? All right, cool. All right, that helps me just sort of gauge things. So my name's Drew Gordon. I'm the director of community and agency outreach at a company called Pantheon. Provides a website management platform for Drupal and WordPress. It's a great platform, really nice stuff. We've got a sponsor booth up there. Happy to talk about that anytime. I've been doing Drupal for a very long time. Before this, before working at Pantheon, I founded a company called Gordon Studios up in the Twin Cities, up in Minneapolis. And we did work with people all around the country, including here at the University of Northern Iowa. And Lynn, who's sitting in the back there, is moral support for us. Was down here working with folks from the University of Northern Iowa as well. And so I've had a long experience of using Drupal, and certainly coming to it from, I still remember my initial impressions, which were not very favorable, frankly, actually. All of the jargon and stuff, my first look at Drupal was very much rejection. It's like, this is silly, come on, I'm a professional, you don't use those words, like, move on. And then later on, I had reason to come back and technically evaluate it and was impressed. And that was a big difference for me. So today we're going to be talking about a number of things. So Drupal from 50,000 feet is sort of just like the biggest high level of what Drupal is. Sort of the worldview that Drupal brings to a project, how it sort of thinks. Because if you go with that flow, your life will be easier if you're working with Drupal. Some of this crazy terminology that we have, talking about what Drupal core is, what Drupal add-ons are. If you're here, you'll hear about modules and themes and other things like that. So talking about what all of those things are. Some workflows. What this whole community idea is, which is a little bit weird. At least that was my initial impression. Like, I use software, I don't. Why would I be involved in a community? But I get it now. So talking a little bit about that. How to get help, and then plenty of time for questions, I hope, as well. Right after this, we're scheduled to go to 11:45. Right after this is lunch, and that's like an hour and 15 minutes. So, leave anytime you want, but I'll hang out here until everybody's got any questions answered that they have. So, from the very highest perspective, Drupal is an open source content management system, which is a lot of jargon. But I want to unpack that a little bit. So, open source is this way of making software that means it's free, as in freedom, as in cost, as in money, and also free as in freedom. So you can go download Drupal, and it's free. And it will cost you nothing to do. You also can never have that taken away from you. That's what open source, any kind of open source software basically has this. So no one can ever tell you, like, you can't make this website about kittens because that's against the user agreement on this Drupal thing, or about your particular religious views or political views or anything else like that. Drupal is free as in money, as free as in freedom. And then the rest of that stuff, the open source content management framework, is tool for building websites. Is probably the right way of saying that. It's also obviously a very silly internet name, like in the grand tradition of internet names being silly. This one actually happens to have been a typo in a different language that was then transcribed to English. What happened was the founder of Drupal, the first person who started working on this, his name's Dries. He's from Belgium. And he was in his college dorm putting together a tool that he could use basically as an online bulletin board. And the word for village in his native language is dorp, D-O-R-P. And so he was going to register that as sort of like a communal kind of thing. And then he spelled it wrong and got drop instead. And he thought, well, that's okay, I know some English. That's kind of interesting, it's whatever, who cares? Dorp, drop, whatever. But the way you say drop in Belgian is Drupal, D-R-U-P-P-E-L. And then he transcribed that back to English. And so Drupal, the thing that we have now, was named. Again, a typo in a different language, then transcribed to English, so kind of phonetically. But at this point in time, jumping forward many years, that was back in 2001 or 2, I think that was approximately 2001. At this point in time, it's this widely adopted framework that is used by tons and tons and tons of websites and organizations around the world. It powers a significant portion of the web, and these are just some of the, and I don't know if you can read all these, but the weather.com, the White House, the United Nations uses a lot. Stanford's got a big installation. University of Northern Iowa has a lot. There's a lot of, this event is put together by Iowa State, UNI, and, that's terrible of me, there's another university that...
University of Iowa.
Thank you, yes, right. I was like, how can that, right? Duh, yes. And so, all of these institutions are using it widely installed. And also, maybe interestingly for all of us in this room, that means that there's a huge market for people who have skills and knowledge about Drupal, because all of these companies and all of the companies that help build their websites, all of those companies are looking for people to help them. So learning some stuff about Drupal can be just an awesome opportunity for some time down the road. Drupal's worldview is content, not pages. And rather than attempting to describe that, oops. Oh, I wish I could click that. All right, we're going to break out. I want to go look at a presentation, actually. And sorry, the windows here are a little bit goofy. I think I go that way. Oof. And then I can get the button. So we're going to take a look at a presentation here from Daniel Jackson, who is, Jacobson. Oh, that's a little bit awkward. Okay, cool. So this is an example. So content, not pages. So that's sort of a weird distinction, perhaps. But what I mean by that is that Drupal thinks about the pieces of content as being like the center part of everything that you do, not like the page. And this is a really great example of this kind of thinking. This is from the folks at National Public Radio, NPR. They have a strategy they call COPE, create once, publish everywhere. And this is just like a brief presentation that the person who led that strategy put together to sort of illustrate this for people. And he did a really nice job with it. Really? And, okay. Sorry, is anyone, this is hard for me to quite see. Does anyone see what I just did? Usability fail? How many were in the...
X.
Is there an X? Oh, God, really? Bad people. All right. Of course, this is a really small window, but... Oh, I clicked the wrong button. I clicked the share link. Look at that. Wow, usability fail. Doesn't that look like left and right arrows? Wow, we need to do the other left and right arrows. Okay, sorry. So what we're going to look at here is an example from a single story, a piece of content that NPR created, again, using the strategy, the same mindset that Drupal uses, and not surprisingly, NPR went on to choose to use Drupal for its technical implementation. But this is the strategy that they wanted to have, is create once, publish everywhere. And by that, that meant you would go ahead and fill out a form that had all of the different pieces of information about the story. So this story is about Winnie the Pooh, and you see that we've got some things here. We've got some, the display date, the updated date, the title, there's a subtitle, all of these things in different fields that you fill out. So what kind of type is it? It's a generic story. Is it independent status? Who's it from? Organization? Filling out all of these pieces of information. And then using that, and you can see that there's maybe some more things here. There's like main fields. There's probably more and more fields where you have more information. And you can scroll down this page. But each of these pieces of information that is used in different ways. So if you were to go on the day that this was created, you would go to the NPR website. You would see this information. So here's the title. Here's the person who wrote it. There's a link, obviously, to the audio. We didn't see that in there. There's an image, date, probably the display date that was selected. Top, like there's a little column here. All of this information populating that one page. But NPR doesn't just have one use for something, right? If you had to go over and in your, this is now their, I can't see the title, but this is like the radio player, or the player in the website player, right? The same title, this, like a short title here, same chance to listen to it. That's all coming from that same information. So if they updated the title, it would go ahead and it would change the title here. It would change the title on their one of their apps. This is all being fed out of the same place. Create once, publish everywhere. And the key to that, we'll see, like they've got a whole bunch of different mobile apps. Again, we're seeing these same kinds of same information all feeding from this one central place. And it gets even a little bit more interesting in that we see that this is now WBUR, which I think might be in Boston, I'm not sure, but where it is doesn't really matter. NPR's got this whole system of like, sending content out to other websites that are affiliated. And so here they are. This is all being pulled back and forth through something called, programmers call an API, which is just like computers talking to computers, basically. And this same information, slightly laid out differently, is all pushed across to these other affiliate websites. This is one from, this is my neck of the woods, from Minnesota. And we'll see, again, actually, this is very small on the page. Does anybody see it? It's maybe kind of small. It's just this little bit right here. Right, that same title, same short description being fed out there. And this is where, it's in the iTunes store, it's on iGoogle, etc. So that philosophy, let me get out of this mode, go back over here, is what I mean by content, not pages. That same philosophy, we weren't looking actually at Drupal screens there. That was actually before they moved to Drupal. But that same philosophy is what chose them to select Drupal, and it's very much native to Drupal. Drupal has that same mindset. What you're going to do is you're going to go working with Drupal. You're going to go sort of break your information down into pieces, and then you're going to use it all over the place. And when you change that title, it will change everywhere it's listed. Which makes sense, right? That's the way it should work. These are computers. Like, I don't want to have to type that title 8,000 times. That's not cool. So from that, there are a number of other things that sort of follow. So Drupal very much thinks about structure before presentation. So if you are NPR or the University of Northern Iowa or someone else like that, one of the very first things you need to do in working with Drupal is assess your content and think about it sort of like analytically. Title, subtitle, what are all the pieces of information associated with this kind of content, or what Drupal calls a context type. So this is sort of like, you think about all of that, and then eventually you'll think about how it gets displayed. You don't start from the sort of like the mock-up of like, we want it nice and green with these nice things here. You certainly can do that, but the aspect of working with Drupal is very much this sort of like engineering kind of thing. It's also very much a system of recipes and not features. So Drupal is this thing that you can extend and add modules to, and we'll talk about what that is. But basically, you can add powers to Drupal. And you do things like that in order to build something like a photo gallery or an online calendar or a map or things like that. But when you're working with Drupal, what you do is not installing the blog thing. What you do is you install the things that allow you to make the blog things. It's very much more like cooking. It's like recipes. And so when you are working with, for example, if you wanted to put together a photo gallery, you don't add the photo gallery module. What you do is you add a whole bunch of modules that give you the features that you would expect in a photo gallery. So, for example, the ability to upload images, the ability to resize images, the ability to have multiple images of the same, like, so you got the small version, the big one, big one, big one, that ability. The ability to have that sort of like little pop-over box that kind of shows up, and it's called a modal dialog in nerd speak. All of these different things. And then you choose how big each of your images should be, how you want to lay them out, etc. And you get sort of all of this flexibility, which is really awesome. And it allows you to extend in new ways too. So say, for example, 6 months after you launch your photo gallery, you realize what's really interesting is that like a lot of users are uploading this stuff, but you'd like to know where they are, where they were taken, where are all these pictures taken. You could go back later on and say, I'm going to add some geolocation kinds of things. I want to be able to see this on a map. So you would go back to that, you would add that sort of power to the website, and now all of your photos could have the opportunity to have a location associated. And then you could have a new view of the website that had like a map. Like I want to see, where are all these, I want to sort of look down, top down, like that picture is taken there. Oh, there's this little cluster of interesting pictures. I'd like to go explore that area. You can sort of open up new things for you. And so again, this flexibility is wonderful and powerful, but it's very much a double-edged sword. Because it means then, when you are doing something simple in Drupal, it turns out you have to spend all of this time thinking about what it is that you're doing. So it takes you some time. Like you have to say like, all right, I'm building a photo gallery. All right, that means I need the image resizer. I need the it's on you to think of the things that you need, which is kind of frustrating. Like sometimes I just want a blog. Why do I have to think about these things? Happily, there are a lot of recipes out there. People post like, here's how I put together my photo album, etc. There's whole tons of at this point in time, learning sites for Drupal and blog posts and books and all kinds of things to help get you over that hump. But it takes time to do that, and you sort of end up again sort of following what feels like a recipe. So because Drupal's got this sort of weird, I shouldn't say weird, but it's this sort of obtuse, this thing about content, again, not pages, it ends up having a lot of terminology that sort of flows from there, that sounds a little bit scientific. So content types, there are 8 big terms that if you're working with Drupal or if you're at the rest of this camp, you'll hear these used over and over. And there's certainly other terms, but I think these are probably the big ones. Content types is actually pretty close to English, right? So that's the kinds of content on your site. So it's a blog post, it's the sort of the proper nouns of your website. So the NPR example there would have been, if you were NPR, you could assume that you have a content type called article. You might have another one called bio, say for the bio of the person who produced the show or who produced that segment. So you could like click on it and find out information about that person. I'm sure they have events and all kinds of other things. If you're selling products, that's another kind of content type. The proper nouns, the pieces of things. The good thing about this is like this really fundamental thing. Next session, after lunch, there is introduction to content types. It's in one of the other rooms, but if you're beginning out in Drupal, it's an excellent follow-up to this session. Fields will also be covered in that, and those are the individual pieces of the content type. So if you thought back to that form I showed, a field is like a title, a date, any one of those pieces of information that make the content type. So it's just all of an image, a select list that allows you to choose things about this content type. Taxonomy is also something that's closely related, and there's a session on it tomorrow at 1. And taxonomy is actually the science of classification of things. That's what taxonomy means. But it's basically ways to categorize content. So if you were, for example, if your website is about selling t-shirts, you might have small, medium, large. You might have 14 colors available. Other things like that. Taxonomy is the tool that allows you to do that, to sort of group things by category. You might, in the case of NPR, have something that is news and politics and something else like that. Like they were going to categorize their stories very differently than someone's going to categorize t-shirts. But all of them would be using the taxonomy system to be doing that sort of thing. Node is another weird word, and it very much comes from this, again, style or this mindset. And so a node is a basic unit of content. You'll also hear the word entity, and at this point in time, you can maybe consider those to be approximate synonyms. Entity is sort of like new sort of thing, but node, a lot of things will refer to things as nodes. And the reason it's called a node and not, say, for example, a page or a thingy-majiggy, they had to come up with a name, A, first, it's got to be called something. But it's this sort of amorphous thing. You don't know that it's necessarily going to be in a page or in the iTunes feed or whatever. So you just have this sort of like generic term for it. That term is node. Questions so far? Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused about the difference between node and maybe a field. It's just a little bit confusing to me, but there are pages and I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So I'll try to explain that a little bit better. So these things are all definitely related. So there's there's some concepts going on here. So content types again are the sort of generic kinds of content you would have on your site. A node would be an instance of a content type. So you would have a node that is a story or is a blog post or is an event, and that node would be made up of all of the information it has that had been captured in fields. Is that a better explanation? Is it?
Yeah.
I see nothing. Cool. Awesome. All right. A few more things. So another 4 big terms. A view is a collection of things. And it's what anyone else in the world might think of as, say, a list. But in Drupal, we call them views. And there's a reason for that, because it was a module and such. But over time, it became just the right way of listing all kinds of content. So if we go back to our, and it's not just a basic list, but if you were in the NPR example, you could imagine that somewhere on their website, it's going to have most recent comments, or the 5 new stories right now. So, something like that. Those things are views. That list of 5 most recent comments, or any kind of list. In fact, in our photo gallery example, if you could think of the generic photo gallery that has like a grid of, say, 20 pictures on it, and then you click the next page, you get the next 20 pictures, that would also be a view. And that's probably why it's not called a list, because it could be used anytime you're sort of bringing together groups of content following some sort of rule, like the 5 most recent comments, or the or the newest 20 pictures, or the 20 pictures from this one particular location. That would be a view. And then we're, I think, close, right? Theme, again, that's sort of English. This means the stuff on the outside of your website, everything that someone experiences. So if we think of those examples of different websites that were shown, they all have the same content, right? They all have the Winnie the Pooh story. But one of them had the logo up here, and it was using these kinds of fonts and these kinds of colors. A different website had a different look to it. That's the theme. It's the thing that is presented to your users. So if it's blue or yellow or green, or using this font or that font or whatnot, all of that is stuff of the theme. A module, and themes are sorts of things that you can get as a plugin, as an extension, as something you can download. And we'll talk about what that means in just a little bit. Modules, similarly, are things that you get that extend your website, that's something you can download, add to it. And these are these functionality providers. So a module to Drupal is like the really important thing that allows your website to do a lot more. So the ability to resize images, for example, or to put together SEO-friendly URLs so that they're nice and clean, or doing things like putting in place a sort of workflow where someone enters in some content, and then somebody later has to approve it, and then it's scheduled for publishing or something like that. All of these kinds of functionalities are examples of things that are provided by modules. And there are thousands and thousands of modules. There are, I think, 20,000-ish on Drupal.org right now. They're sorted by popularity, which is good, because how else are you going to find things? As you're working with Drupal, just sort of, at some point in time, taking some time to peruse that list and reading the description of what it is, it gets to be like the top 50 modules or so are things that would be installed in, say, 80% of websites. Because it's going to be common things like a WYSIWYG editor, which allows you to do bold and italics and stuff like that without having to know HTML code. Oftentimes camps have like a sort of, here's 50 modules you've never heard of, in 50 minutes or something like that. In fact, Hofmackel, who's not here, who's one of the rooms is named after him, he's got a session like that. He's done at many different events. But coming to an event like this and asking someone about like, hey, how do you do whatever it is you're trying to do, is a really normal activity and a great way to learn. And there are a number of presentations here. John from Ames, he's giving a talk on like entity field, embedding views in video or something like that. And it's sort of a normal sort of thing. People talk about a specific module like there's some sort of gem that, hey, this does all these great things. So anyways, modules, functionality providers. And our last big term is a block. And a block is sort of like this ancillary information that is on a page. Something like what's in your shopping cart. If we thought back to that Winnie the Pooh example, the story, like the whole page, so it was the whole page, right? The story was just here. Over here was an ad, and then here was like the 5 most recent comments, or something else, and they're kind of like blocks. That's the name. These sort of like chunks of extra stuff. The social sharing, the bad button I clicked on from the thing before, that would be like a little tiny block at the bottom, perhaps, if that was built with Drupal. Signing up for the newsletter, etc. So those are the big, if you can make your way through that, your Drupal to English, dictionary is doing pretty good, and hopefully that gets you survivability for the rest of this. Any questions on those?
Is everything on a page a block?
So the question is everything on a page a block? No. However, the concept of that question has led Drupal to some big architectural decisions. Because if you look, if you go back to my example there, so like I did this and said, the main content's here, all of these are blocks because they're square. Well, that's also a square. How come we're using different systems for this stuff? And so over time, in the next version of Drupal, specifically actually, these things are getting much more unified in their concept. So Drupal 8, which will be out sometime, when it's ready, it's officially working. That's what we all trained to know and answer. The next version of Drupal will conceptually make those much more similar, but I think for a long time, we're still always going to talk about these things as being blocks. So, like, there's a nerdy engineering answer that's like sort of, but human being, no. Other questions? Cool. All right. So that was good. Who wants to take a stab at defining any one of those words for the gold star? I won't actually have a quiz, but does anybody? All right, actually, who wants to say what a content type is?
Okay, content types are different types of nodes that you can have.
Yeah.
So it's basically different structures that
Yeah.
like articles.
Nicely done. Cool. All right, I'm going to just jump down a little ways. Anybody want to say what a theme is?
The outside of your site.
Awesome. Great. And anybody want to just volunteer a new gem that they just learned in that review? All right. Okay.
You is a list.
Awesome.
That's all I got.
That's something. All right. So Drupal, when you get Drupal, if you go to Drupal.org and download it, and then you install it. How many people have done this? How many people have installed Drupal before? Right. And I'm just curious, does anybody, in my own, personal experience, you download Drupal and you sort of stare at it and you're like, huh, all right, I got a Drupal. Now, it comes out of the box, it's not very impressive, right? So you get it, it's got this basic content management stuff. You could go, it says, you can't see this, but it says add new content. You can go and type, new content. Hey, I made my page, whee! And we all do that. And it has the idea of users and permissions and the ability to do stuff. And it's got this, sleek blue look to it. But it's very bare bones. And if Drupal core was the only thing interesting about Drupal, Drupal would not be very interesting, frankly. Just sort of almost proof of concept thing that you would hope to make better. So when working with Drupal, what you want to do is very quickly you get Drupal core and then you start making it yours with all of these add-ons. So right, modules and themes, we talk about both of those things as being add-ons. Modules, again, these functionality providers. The process of working with modules is often called site building, because what you end up doing is you download a module, and then you're setting up all of your functionality around that. So you're building the site with modules. On this, we have color-coded, I believe, purple are all of the site building things. So by and large, in your schedule, purpley things are module-ish and all about building a site. So when people are talking about site building, they're often talking about how to work with modules to do stuff. Themes, the word theming, not surprisingly, is associated with that. And you'll notice that those are green color-coded. So sessions all about the user experience, and so right now there's something very interesting happening, like in another session. It's actually terrible, you're not missing it, don't worry about it. But other sessions in the future, there are some good sessions on theming. And so again, green, if you're interested in more of those kinds of things, green is your map. You can write your own of these. You can make your own theme, you can make your own module. Most times when you're building a website, say for University of Northern Iowa, you don't download that theme because no one has uploaded it, right? No one has shared, no one took the time to build the University of Northern Iowa theme for the universe just in case somebody wanted it. What happens is the University of Northern Iowa says, we need a theme, it's got to have our colors, it's got to have our logos, it's got to have all of these things, so you make your own theme. So most websites for professional organizations build their own themes. However, if you're just doing something quick where you're just like, I want it to not be blue, there are themes available on Drupal.org, you can just grab one that you like. But modules are very heavily shared. Again, so these functionality providers, you don't want to write your own thing for resizing images, because yuck. Somebody already wrote it. That wheel has been, that has been solved. So modules are things that you're downloading all the time. Both modules and themes are found on Drupal.org. You can also, of course, write your own modules. When there's something like this particular thing that you need to do, like, doesn't exist yet, I need to make it do it. This wonderful flexibility Drupal, you can do it. If you've ever seen it on anywhere on the web, you can do it with Drupal. It's got this huge amount of flexibility. And they're also community contributed. So people like us, maybe future selves of us, are the folks uploading these things, which is really cool and empowering, and also maybe a little scary. I don't know if I trust future me or future some other person. So that becomes another part of working with modules becomes understanding how to vet them. And that's something that we won't really get into today, but the short version is things that are really, really popular are installed on hundreds of thousands of websites. So if you go to Drupal.org and you look at the modules tab and you sort of look at those first 50, 100 modules, those are used by millions, in some cases, of websites. And so pretty well vetted. People have figured out that these work, they're supported, they work like they're supposed to, like it says on the tin. If you go to the bottom of that list, say of 20,000 modules, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, or go to page 400 or whatever it is, and find the one that's only installed on one website, it might not be the best module. It might also be actually really awesome, but solve a very particular problem. This is you might have, for example, if you're the University of Northern Iowa, something that does something very specific with a campus Wi-Fi alert if you happen to be on campus, and it, if you're, and it's in the theme of the site. So somebody wrote it. It's really cool functionality, but it's very particular to the needs of this campus, and maybe 3 other campuses around the country. So you might find something like that there, but odds are more likely that it's just some oddball thing. Somebody wrote, kind of threw it up there, and they forgot about it too. So with workflows, with Drupal, again, because of all the way that the Drupal thinks, and the way you put together a Drupal site, what you end up doing is you actually have to so before installing even, you end up sort of, once you've done this a few times, you say actually, I'm not gonna go install Drupal and get the modules until I know what I'm building, right? So you end up spending, there's sort of a necessary planning phase that Drupal sort of forces you to go through. It's like, all right, what are you building? Okay, well, you're building a photo gallery, great. All right, so you need to think about what that experience is going to be like, what the functionality is, spend all of the time, sort of map it out, whether it's on a napkin or in an email back and forth to somebody. But at some point in time, you're really sort of forced to plan first, which is not a bad thing, but it's the way things work. Likewise, if you're designing, you really have to think about the kinds of content you have, because you're going to have maybe different looks for articles than you are for events or bios and such. And so you end up doing a fair amount of planning before you start in with a Drupal site, just because, again, the way that Drupal thinks and wants to work. The good news is, if you're how many people here just edit Drupal sites? Anybody? All right, a couple, okay, cool. The good thing is, so a well-built Drupal site should be pretty straightforward. And you end up just needing to click the Edit tab, right? And then you type, and then you click Save. It should work, right? So, of course, though, knowledge is always power, so the more things you know about, that will always help you out. All right. So the Drupal, in my experience at least, has this curious thing called a community around it. And I use all kinds of open source software. I use Firefox. Well, I don't use Firefox as much anymore, but over time, I've used lots and lots of open source software. Drupal is the first thing I ever really associated people with. But it's very much part of what Drupal is. And there's a tagline on Drupal.org, which I thoroughly believe. It's come for the software, stay for the community. And there's a lot. So this is very small, 95,000 users actively contributing, 2,000 some comments, those are commits, changes to code in the last week, 4,000 some comments in the last week, people talking about an issue, how do I do this, or whatever. It's a very active community. There's a lot of stuff going on. And there's lots of ways that people are getting together. So there's obviously a camp like this. These happen all around the country. I'm up in the Twin Cities. We had our annual camp a month or two ago or something like that. There was just something in Colorado. And Drupal is now big enough around the world that probably any day of the week, somewhere in the world, there is a group of people doing stuff just like this. So a lot of different camps and meetups happening. Up again in the Twin Cities, we have 4 meetups every month. That's just sort of informal, after hours. There's one that's just sort of like the social happy hour, which is a personal favorite of mine. The word Drupal may or may not be used during the whole time, but you're hanging out with nice people. There's one that's very much sort of like a traditional user group where, hey, I've got this problem, maybe somebody stands up to present about how they built their photo gallery, and then there's after that questions and answers, and how do I do this and stuff, and sort of just collaborating. It's sort of like a collaborative coding night too, where people just get together and they're sort of working on their laptops and maybe talking a little bit and sharing code examples, but a little bit more engineering, developer, programming. And then there's all sorts of ways online. So there's something called IRC in Drupal, which is ancient chat. For those of you who, has anyone ever used IRC before? Yeah, wow, yeah, like that. All right, that's hardcore. But the Drupal community uses IRC a lot. It's like Slack from 1980 or something like that. There are tons of newsletters. There are podcasts. There are blogs. There's an annual conference, DrupalCon. This morning when someone asked about how many people have been to 10 DrupalCons, there was no cons? No, that's there's only been 12 of those worldwide or something like that. So there's one every year in Europe, one every year in North America. That's been going on since 2004 maybe, depending on how you count these things. So there haven't been that many. Those early ones were 20 people. But cons and camps, certainly, there are a lot of people here at this event who've been to probably more than 30, 40, 50. Doug Van, how many Drupal events do you think you've been to?
This was my 51st camp.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. I don't know. It's got to be probably 20 or 30 for me. Doug's a real road warrior there. There's also things called sprints, too, where people get together and work on the code that powers all of this stuff. Sorry, that was sort of long-winded, but one of the interesting things I think about this that really resonates with me now, my own experience was going to Boston for DrupalCon many years ago and just being blown away by the quality of people. It's like, wow, these are really nice people all working together to try and solve something. That's cool. I like that. And previous to that, we'd just been using it, and it's kind of like, we should just go check it out, see what this thing is. And the quality of people was just so amazing, and I just enjoyed them. And I was like, all right, well, I'll do that again next year. And over time, started doing more and more, and now I do things like present and such. But one of the aspects of this is, I think, actually really important for organizations is that anytime you're choosing software, you're making a bet that you hope is a long-term bet. Because how many people have ever changed from one platform or another, one platform to another, be that web or anything else? How many, like Windows to Mac or, anything, right? How much is that fun? It's zero is the fun amount. That it's just always a hassle. It doesn't matter if it's your personal computer, doesn't matter if it's your website, doesn't matter if it's your intranet, doesn't matter if it's your word processing software, the way you do spreadsheets, going from Office to Google Apps, great new cool thing, but now I gotta get all this stuff. Like, it's always a hassle. So you don't want to change these things very often. So one of the quotes or anecdotes that I heard as the White House was choosing to use Drupal that really resonated with me was that the person, the technology officer there, that was saying, it's like, when you choose an open source software, you are making a bet on the people. And if you would be willing to invite them over to your house for dinner, it's probably going to go places. That's a really curious way to evaluate software. But I think it's very true. And I think a lot of the power that Drupal has is this collection of people. It's a flawed software system because it's software, because all software is flawed. But this group of people getting together to try and solve the problems, it is continually risen to the challenge of making it better. Like, before Drupal 7, there were issues with some certain functionality. It's just clunky. It was hard to solve. So Drupal 7, before that, Drupal 6, it's hard to solve. The community has continuously risen to the challenge of, make this work better. And that, as long as, my own personal, my career is certainly tied up in this stuff. As long as good people keep working on this, it's got a good, long, healthy trajectory ahead of it. So welcome. You're all part of the Drupal community now. All right, and we're almost done here, which is good. So, as you're new to Drupal, one of the things that you'll need to do often is get help. Even those of us who've been doing Drupal for a long time need help. So, while you're here at this event, it's awesome. Anybody who's got a thing on their badge, sponsor, speaker, volunteer, they're all going to be knowledgeable, nice people. Ask them. If you're sitting in a session and you go to your next session and you don't know the person next to you, odds are, ask them, right? Because they might have similar questions to you. Or maybe they know half of the answer and you can supply the other half. But there are all kinds of services out there too for learning more about Drupal. So DrupalEyes.me is an online tutorial service. So you can go watch videos and learn how to do things. Build a module, another super awesome service like that. There are tons of books. One of my favorite is the Green O'Reilly book, which is Using Drupal. It's an awesome book. Just sort of it's got a lot of those recipes. I want to build a flow guide. All right, that's chapter 4. Super handy for getting practical. And tons and tons and tons. Doug, again, just calling you out. I know you do a lot of training. Do you have any particular favorite training tools, or are you just starting? Sorry.
Build module is my favorite.
Cool. Awesome. Run by a really awesome person, Chris Shattuck as well. He's one of these just great human beings. And then just connecting with the community with questions. Again, go to meetups or just on Twitter asking a question or things like that. Pretty active place. Be bold, ask a question. If you don't get an answer right away, nudge. Be polite though, because everybody's busy and doing stuff. But generally, pretty helping kind of place. So that takes us to the end, actually. Hooray! I maybe went a little bit fast. Thank you, yeah. Does anybody have questions about any of that or other stuff?
What is the difference between Drupal PM and Drupal Con?
Mm-hmm. 3 letters? 4 or 5? Something, yeah. Camps tend to be something like this. So this has maybe got 150 people or something like that. A con is the Drupal Con. This is a picture from one of the Drupal Cons where there's a lot more people. And this is like this picture is very large. That has 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people and is held just once a year in North America, and then once a year in Europe, and then they've been starting to do them in other places as well. So there was one in Colombia last year, Bogota in South America. There was one in Australia a year or 2 ago. So they're happening, India has got next in January or February or something like that. So again, it's size basically. One of the really cool things though is that actually at these camps, one of the things I love about them is that oftentimes the same speakers that will be judged as capable of speaking to that crowd are here, right? So there are a lot of people here who are presenting who've also presented at numerous DrupalCons. So you have this chance to hey, these really cool people, and you just get to meet them, and then you're talking to them, and then you realize, wait, you're Dave Reed? Oh my, I didn't realize that. It was just kind of cool. Dave Reed, for example, is the person with I think probably the most big important modules to Drupal. He's got all of the modules. He's written a lot of modules. We give him a hard time about that. He's here. He's wearing a yellow shirt today. He was sitting in the front. I'm sure he's doing a session, probably on media. Super friendly guy. So it's a chance to just talk to these people whose modules you might use, for example. It's pretty cool. Other questions?
You kind of touched on it with the number of people that use different modules, but with it being open source, and should there be concerns about security?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's see if I can maybe take a moment. This is actually a, how am I going to do that? Cool, all right. That'll work, and then I have to get my mouse over there. All right, there we go, pointer. Drupal.org. Typed it right. Ooh, and it's weirdly expanded. All right, see if I can get a bit. This window is so tiny. All right, well, that'll do. So security generally within Drupal is actually a blanket statement, very, very good. Drupal is often heralded as sort of if you're doing security in open source, Drupal is an example of people who do it well. It's able to do things like the White House or the University of Northern Iowa because it goes through serious security reviews. There's very serious forensic analysis of code that goes into Drupal core, certainly, and a lot of the major modules. That being said, it's software. It has flaws. If you have a Drupal site, you need to be subscribed to the updates list that say when security announcements come out. They're once a month on Wednesdays is the schedule. Or no, that's core. It's every Wednesday. Security announcements come out. Anyways, there's an email list you should be a part of, and they'll always try to give an indicator of who would this impact. Oftentimes, security things in Drupal are with a module, and it takes a very particular setting. For example, and it'll try to describe that in the announcement. It'll say, if you use the so-and-so module, there's a security release. Here's who's this is mitigated by the fact that it only works if you also have the other module installed that does this thing, and that's set to yes instead of no. The default is yes. And also, your users have to be able to edit the home page to really take advantage of this. It's well, all right, websites I build don't let people who just come in from the internet edit it, right? So a lot of them are pretty edge casey, and so they're not urgent. You're okay, should do it. Security release, should do it. But it doesn't need to be boom, right this moment. There are occasionally, this is quite rare, but there have been instances of no, do this now. And those have been announced as well. They're not, I can only think of one in the last year. But Drupal core has got this team, security analysts basically that work on it full time, or don't work on it full time, but are heavily involved in analyzing it, and people, because there's so many people involved with Drupal, that's so many more eyes that go onto it. And there was a Pentagon study about, that I'm going to misquote the numbers on, so I won't give them, but basically, this model of doing security, which is security by like a lot of people pouring through the code, is much more effective than what's known as security by obscurity, which is Microsoft Word has a bug. It actually has more than one. Right? None of us know what they are. Some of them are probably security. Eventually, somebody's going to stumble across it because it's something bad is happening on the wild. People don't have a chance to see it beforehand. All right, everybody, download your update. Unless you don't, and it's blah 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 blah. As you get further down the list, so let's just go to download and extend. So we're going to talk about modules, most installed. So let's go with this most installed. All right, so 17,000 modules. But views is I didn't mention the fact that that's actually a module, but it's used on almost every single website. It's not part of Drupal core. Download and get views. Like scrolling down this list of say 50 or so that are on this first page, all of these are going to have great security. Next page, all of these are going to have great security. They'll maybe have an occasional update that says security release, but again, as you get down like 500, 700, 1,000 down the list, people can't really be, that security team can't be proactive about that far down, right? Somebody has to flag it and say, I think there's a security issue here. Security team, please review my assessment of that. And then the security team steps in and says, oh, yes, that is, or no, it's not really because of this, this, and this, etc. But it's got a very well-established process for that. Sorry, that was a super long-winded answer, but hopefully thorough. Other questions?
Well, with the understanding that can all change because it's open source, I'd be interested in what you found to be the challenges or frustrations.
Yeah. So it's supremely flexible. It's that double-edged sword, probably. It takes, by virtue of what you're doing, and by virtue of what at Gordon Studios, what we did was we built these websites for organizations that had complex needs. And a lot of that just goes into like timeline and cost, basically. And so while Drupal is free, one of the things that it gets used because it's so flexible and customizable, it gets used for projects that need flexibility and customization, which tend to have a lot of layers to them. You've got to understand all the needs of the users. You've got to do your usability testing. They tend to get to be very large projects, which is fun because you sink your teeth into them. But as somebody who was the process of providing websites, building them custom for people like the University of Northern Iowa and many others, it was like I got very used to it and I understood why. But like, wow, this is free software. Why does it cost $100,000? I mean, like, I understand. It's because we spend a lot of time doing it. Like, I'm not free. That's the thing. I have a mortgage, right? I have groceries that I need to buy. All those kinds of things. So I don't know. I mean, if the frustrations I would have would be along that sort of like, sometimes it's fun to do something quick. I mean, this is, again, my own perspective. Something, just like knock something out really fast. Some of our most satisfying projects that we did in the last year or so were these really tight, small projects, some of which we built with Drupal. But that was just like enjoyable. Just like, done. Hey, all right, great, move on. All right, anybody else? Great, well,
Sorry.
Mhm.
What do services like Acquia, I'm not sure if Pantheon's in that group as well, provide?
Yeah.
Is that like big companies for individual users?
So Pantheon is in many ways, so Acquia is a competitor with Pantheon in many ways. So that being said, Acquia doesn't do anything good at all. It's just terrible. I wouldn't even try. No, Acquia provides a lot of services around Drupal that are sort of the whole breadth of Drupal. So they provide services to build websites with Drupal. They provide services to support websites, people who have Drupal. They have some tools for developers. so that they can easily use all the rest of Aqua's offerings. They do hosting, which is where they're competitors with Pantheon, and some things around workflow. So they're this kind of like, they focus on very large things, though. They want Drupal in the enterprise. So there's talk in the Drupal space about Drupal becoming more and more enterprise, and Dries, who's the founder of Drupal, works for Acquia. And now this sort of influence is like undue influence, and then, like this is like something the community talks about. Regardless of any of that stuff, Acquia's focus is very much enterprise. So Acquia would be interested, for example, in talking to someone like the University of Iowa or the University of Minnesota, where they're involved actually in providing some of the infrastructure that the University of Minnesota has moved to with Drupal. So Pantheon is much more narrowly focused in some ways and a little bit broader. So Pantheon is essentially website management for Drupal and WordPress, including the hosting. So all of the things that go into sort of like workflow, like having an environment where I want to have dev test and live for my things, so that I'm not just pushing my code willy-nilly out into the live website and hoping it doesn't break. So it has this sort of workflow and version control and best practices and stuff. I'd be happy to talk about more as a differentiator. And then it also, and on top of that, like actually the most performant hosting actually that's out there. It's incredibly solid hosting. But it also is doing WordPress too. So for folks in the space who do both Drupal and WordPress, it's a nice thing that you can just use one platform to support all those things. You don't have to have yet another thing.
Could you give some examples of other ways that Drupal can be used within an organization besides a website?
Sure. Yeah, actually, one of the things I sort of scrolled past there was something called distributions, and that download and extend. There was something called distributions was a thing. We didn't really talk about it because there's limited time. There are a number of distributions that are sort of attempts to sort of package a recipe for Drupal to do very specific things. One of them is, for example, called Open Atrium. And that is very much an intranet space collaboration thing. It's like, all right, so Open Atrium. What would Open Atrium compete against? A little bit like Basecamp, perhaps. So Drupal that is sort of configured to work like Basecamp. If you're familiar with that, it's sort of like a project management tool. So Drupal is very flexible. It can be used to do pretty much any kind of web-based thing. So something like Basecamp, for example, you could build with Drupal and do it very nicely. You can do things like your internal document sharing at an organization, and like sort of knowledge management kinds of things. You can build CRMs, which is, depending on who you talk to, either client relationship management or customer relationship management or some other combination of that. But CRM, so you're keeping all of your contacts in one place and being able to look them up and track people, something like what Salesforce does. So there's all kinds of different examples. Is there something in particular that you're thinking of or wondering about?
Well, we have actually Tony's speaking upstairs. He works at iSource where I am, and he has been walking around saying, "Well, I've just been to other places we can use Drupal," and I just hadn't heard of that.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I was kind of curious.
Yeah, no, it's a very flexible tool, and so that again, like that whole there is definitely an appeal to standardize on it, right? So you don't have yet another technology you need to manage.
Yeah.
To the extent like that, but then the flip side of that, all things in life, flip side, is that you're now more reliant on Drupal and maybe Tony, right? And so Drupal is now a more important thing. It's sort of like an organizational stake. Like, yep, that's great. It simplifies our life to be able to do all these things with Drupal, and we have the control and such. But now, if you're sort of organizationally involved, you should be mindful of like, oh, okay, now Drupal is a little bit more important to us. We need to just be mindful of that in organization kind of planning. All right. Anything else? Again, I will stay. We have actually reached our time. Lunch will be over where we had the keynote this morning. So just a short walk away. But thank you all very much.